you read a Catholic thing?
Right there.
Do you read that? Have you ever read that?
On occasion. We're live. How y'all doing? Your host, Michael, with Reason and Theology on a Saturday afternoon. By the way, y'all can put some questions in there for Father Brown, who is my guest here, obviously, in person. Father Brown, good to see you again.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you again, Michael.
We were just joking that, it kind of feels like we're going to do a commentary of an NBA game or an NFL game. The way we're positioned here.
I can feel my announcer voice coming out. Bienvenidos, damas y caballeros. Bienvenidos, inteligencia y teología, Reason and Theology, live.
I think
in vivo.
Father, I think you found your second calling in life here. I know your calling in life, your primary calling is the priesthood, but
yeah,
I think that might be your second calling.
I should be announcing bullfights.
Well, you had an opportunity to come here to Monroe because you were recently kind of in the area, right?
That's right. I was up in Shreveport for Jesuit High School. I'm in New Orleans. Jesuit High School is in New Orleans. And Shreveport and Monroe are both way up in North Louisiana. And I had to come up here for a football game, and so that made it easy for me to drop on by and say hello.
Wow. And like I said, y'all can put some questions in there for Father Brown in the chat. Make sure to put them to @Reason and Theology. And by the way, if our audio is low, just let me know in the chat there and I can adjust that. But Father Brown, before we dive into live chat questions, let's talk about the Catholic thing, because you were telling me about a recent articles, November 10th, so 2 days ago, by Francis Meyer on the Catholic thing. The title of the article is "The Jesuits, What Went Wrong." Dun, dun,
right.
dun.
right. So Fran Meyer wrote an article, which I think is pretty good, from the Catholic thing. And his experience of the Jesuits was good. He still loves the Jesuits. And I sent him an email. He emailed me right back with his phone number. I called him. He called me right back. We spoke briefly about it. Very, very nice man, very intelligent man, a very good writer, I think. He kind of came up with this question of what happened to the Jesuits that he grew up with, what went wrong.
Right.
And so he put that question out to several people that he knew, some of them in the society, and some of the responses that he got back prompted him to sort of come up with a list of 8 things that appear to have gone wrong in the Society of Jesus. And so I think it's a great topic for us to talk about today.
Yeah. Now, there was a few things that he had there. I think it's like 10 points or 8 points that he discusses about the Jesuits and their kind of criticisms.
Yeah.
One of them, I think it's number 2, there's a basic flaw in Jesuit spirituality with too much emphasis on personal discernment. He continues, the discernment taking place in their own minds and lives has priority over the discernment of the church through history. Now, honestly, I'm not an expert in Jesuits, but I did not get the impression that that was the case and that there was an inherent flaw in Jesuit spirituality. Can you maybe comment on that?
Yeah, I'm going to say that I think there is not an inherent flaw in Jesuit spirituality, except that there is the danger that one can feel justified in their beliefs by the discernment that they've done. And often people do a discernment in a bubble, and they're thinking about things. Discerning the spirits is probably the more technical term. Discerning the spirits, and often they don't do as good a job with that as they should, and yet they feel very confident because they put so much thought into it that they must be right, and there's a problem there. However, I would take that back and say St. Ignatius Loyola gives us what's called a first principle and foundation. Man was created by God, our Heavenly Father, to praise, reverence, and serve Him, and by this means to save his soul. And insofar as we have choices, then we should be indifferent to those choices, except in the ways in which they help us to glorify God, to meet the end for which we were made. But that little piece in there that I kind of said quickly, insofar as we have those choices, that's a key point. And of course, you're going to have some Jesuits and people all the time who miss that piece of that authoritative doctrinal answer that the church gives us about something, or a moral law that we're bound to, that would make discernment about that useless.
Don't you think, if one were to say, as the author does here, that there's a basic flaw in Jesuit spirituality, doesn't that then mean that the church has officially approved something that's spiritually flawed?
I think that's interesting. First, just to clarify, I don't think these are the author's 8 points. These are points that were sent to him, and he's just sort of putting them out there for discussion, I believe. yeah, I don't think that the Catholic Church for 500 years would be so enthusiastically behind the spiritual exercises the way that they have been if they were truly flawed. Now, any person who goes to discern something, he himself is going to be prone to sin, like all of us.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. Now, here was another one that I thought was curious when I was kind of skimming through it. Another one that he presents is Jesuits seem to believe their own press about the superiority of their intellects in Jesuit ministries. As compared with others in the church, they are not good collaborators. Now, I do have
Well,
to say that the Jesuits do have a very strong intellectual tradition. So there's some truth as far as them having that tradition, but as far as they believe their own press and
yeah,
then aren't good collaborators,
yeah.
I don't know about that. What do you think?
Well, okay. So to begin with, there's a selective process before any Jesuit can enter the Society of Jesus. I mean, we're taking IQ tests. We are there are standards that the Jesuits are held to. We hold ourselves to, and I think the Church depends on the Society of Jesus to engage intellectually a lot of the problems of today. And we always want to be missionable in ways because we want to have done the work beforehand and make ourselves available to the Holy Father to be able to be missioned somewhere where an intellectual grasp of the problem is necessary. So to be available, we need to do this, and we stay in school as long. Our formation is as long as anybody's. It's you can say it's the longest. I think maybe the Legionaries of Christ is just as long as ours or something, but it's long. It's definitely long. I was in school for a very long time.
You don't have to get a doctorate though, right? Not all Jesuits.
You don't have to get a doctorate. I think that I suppose there's a way. If you're a Jesuit brother, you might even be able to get away with very few degrees, but our formation is still very long. So you're not gonna be as prone to saying dumb things if you've been formed for a very long time. You would hope. You would hope you would be.
I don't know.
That's a good point. No, listen, my own reputation is probably not as high as a lot of people's. Do they believe their own press about the superiority of their intellects and Jesuit ministries as compared with others in the church? Well, sure. So St. Joseph Pignatelli was the Jesuit saint who, after the suppression, so some of y'all may know your history, that the Jesuits for nearly 40 years were suppressed in most places throughout the world due to all kind of controversies about how the Jesuits did their missionary work. And there were a lot of things that I think the Jesuits could have done better. I think there were also a lot of petty jealousies that were involved as well. And there was the Jesuits ended up being suppressed for a while. And when they came back, St. Joseph Pignatelli was the Father General who sort of brought all these Jesuits back together. And he had done a great job of keeping the Jesuit charism alive, even as the order was suppressed. And so Joseph Pignatelli gets the credit for basically keeping the Society of Jesus together through that suppression. He had a lot of things to say about why we had been suppressed in the first place. And it was very self-accusatory, right? It was very much, and it centered on that very point, that Jesuits believe that because we know we're right, who cares if we need to get along with everybody else? Who cares if we need to collaborate with others? Who cares if we can intellectually just nail somebody, we can just go ahead and do that because we know we're right. And I think that that's very bad. I think it's very, very bad, and it is counterproductive. And I can't say enough bad things about that attitude. And sure, some Jesuits have that attitude. I would say we all have it to some small degree. And may God forgive us all for it, and may God help us undo the damage we've done with that same attitude.
There's one point on here that he brings up that I think a lot of people are probably going to say, you know what, I think that's an apt observation. I want to get your thoughts. He says, Jesuit salt has lost its savor, and an insipid taste does not attract good young men. The talented and orthodox too often seem to be screened out. I think, again, a lot of people feel that way. They may even just feel that way about the church in general, but especially with the Jesuits. Do you think that that's accurate? Is that true?
Okay, so this is what I think is meant by that comment. Jesuit salt has lost its savor. Okay, so we've had Father General say this, and I believe that this could be true, that there's a charism for an order, that the charism is no longer needed by the church. And so there was a time for 1,500 years where the Jesuits did not exist in the life of the church. And then for 500 years we have been, I think, have had a major impact on the church, for better or for worse. has the Jesuit charism lost its flavor, right? Has it lost its goodness for the world? You know, there's nothing else to do with salt except let it be trampled underfoot once it loses its flavor. I happen to believe that no, that's not true. I believe that the world could use more authentic Jesuit spirituality. The world could use more a better understanding of Ignatian spirituality, Jesuit spirituality. And I think there's lots of good work that the Jesuits are doing, and I believe will keep doing. So has it lost its taste? You know, I don't think so. It does not attract good young men. Well, I know a lot of good young men who are entering the Society of Jesus. I mean, fantastic young men who inspire me to be a little bit more pious, who inspire me to be a little bit better and a little bit more saintly, and who are incredibly intelligent. I cannot help but think that at least is not completely right. Now, here's where the point of this might be true, of this second part of the statement, that talented and orthodox too often seem to be screened out. It's not enough to be talented, and it's not enough to be orthodox. It's not enough to be talented and orthodox. There's the Society of Jesus calls us to a lot more than simply being talented and orthodox. It calls us to a certain level of toughness that you don't find in everybody, and don't need to find in everybody, right? Not everybody needs to be able to be a missionary if they were called to be a missionary. You know, not everybody needs to be able to live very, very poorly with Christ's poor in a third world country. Not everybody needs to be able to do those things, but Jesuits do. And so sometimes young men get screened out for that reason. I do think sometimes there are young men who are let's see how I can say this exactly, who are unfairly, or that the expectation of the order is sometimes too high for the very beginning. So I know a young man, for example, who was thinking about the Society of Jesus. He was still just at the kind of kicking the tire stage, and someone asked him a question about, what do you do when you're tempted to such and such a sin? And he says, oh, well, you know, I just changed the channel and on TV and put it on EWTN. And to me, that sounds like a great guerrilla warfare tactic against those kinds of sins he was tempted to. And yet the Jesuits that were talking to him walked away saying he's not ready for the Society of Jesus. If all he knows how to do is change the channel to EWTN, he's just not ready. And I thought, well, yeah, I know he's not ready, but he might grow into that. And there may be other reasons why he wasn't ready, but I do think sometimes there are Jesuits who believe that candidates need to be farther along than maybe they need to be. So the reality might feel like certain guys get screened out because they're Orthodox, but that's just not true. I mean, I'm a little Orthodox. I don't know how talented I am, but I'm at least a little Orthodox, I think.
I haven't heard anything crazy from you yet. So.
Give it time.
Give it time, right? Are you able to kind of spot people's vocation? Like, bam, right there. That's a guy who has a Jesuit vocation.
Well, okay, so that's a really interesting question. I believe that I often spot people and say, boy, you remind me of good Jesuits that I know. You really remind me of good Jesuits that I know in this aspect of that. And when you meet someone who reminds you totally of good Jesuits, that, I can't help but think I've spotted one who needs to be a Jesuit. But the fact is, the charism of the Jesuits is one of discernment. It's one of long, hard prayer about these things and waiting for confirmation from God for the result of that prayer. It's also there's a lot of back and forth that goes on between your spiritual director and a directee. There's a whole lot of obedience involved. There's a 2-year novitiate, right? So we enter the Society of Jesus and can't take vows for 2 whole years. You know your vocation is to be a Jesuit. You're convinced. You're ready to go, and wait. And so I do think that, just to jump out the bushes and say, you look like a Jesuit, you should be a Jesuit, we want you, that's a mistake. As tempting as it is to be that way, it definitely wouldn't jive with the charism that St. Ignatius Loyola gave us.
That's a good point, that you kind of have to wait while you're doing this, while you're discerning your vocation. And I think that's important, because sometimes we have a temptation to just jump right into something without sufficiently thinking through it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do appreciate that one isn't not just immediately embraced,
Right.
in their
Right.
vocation.
That's right. That's exactly right.
There's another one that he brought up here, one more, and then I want to get to some chat questions. Y'all, again, feel free to put some questions there for Father. So we'll turn this into an Ask a Jesuit kind of stream here in just a little bit.
Yeah.
Make sure to put them to @Reason and Theology so I can pick them out from comments. But there was another one. I think this is number 7. It's kind of a longer one. Pope Francis has imposed the Jesuit top-down authority structure on the present church. The Pope, like the Jesuit Superior General, makes the decision by himself. He might pretend to use a synodal system, but only to bring up issues and not to make decisions. He'll make all the final decisions himself using his own personal discernment rather than follow the teachings of the historical church with the assistance of other bishops in making those decisions. Wow, there's a lot going on in
Right.
that one.
That's right.
I know I have some thoughts, so I'm sure you
Yeah.
do. What do you think there?
Well, let's kind of break it down, right? Pope
Yeah.
Francis has imposed the Jesuit top-down authority structure on the present church. Okay, so is the Jesuit order a top-down authority structure? It is. It really, really is. There's a very short chain of command, right? There's a very short chain of command. There's, the way I always see it in my prayer, and is that it begins with Christ, right? And the Father sends Christ. Christ, of course, founds the church, right? And the church is a real thing, is a real live thing that needs to be listened to. And that is led by the vicar on earth of Christ, the Pope, right? So if you're going to just give names to people, it's going to be God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then you have the Pope. And then you have Father General, who's the head of the Society of Jesus in particular. But remember, the Pope can come and can pluck a Jesuit out from anywhere and send him somewhere else. If he's at least Jesuits with that extra vow of obedience to the Pope, he can do that too, right? So that's a pretty short chain of command, right? So the Father General has his provincials. Provincials have their local superiors, and then the subject himself. That is really short. That's really, really, really short. And so there needs to be a great amount of trust placed on the people who are in the trenches, have their boots on the ground, and are in the middle of trying to solve problems. And then there also needs to be a real, not just obedience in terms of I'll do what I'm told, but a real kind of obedience where you understand what your superior is asking you to do so you can help accomplish his goals rather than your own, right? That's a real kind of obedience. And I think some of that has to be, I think the present Holy Father, Pope Francis, probably understands that pretty well. I also think he seems to love talking about things and asking questions, even if the questions might seem dangerous sometimes. I think he loves asking those questions. And, I forget which encyclical he began with the line of, this is not meant to answer any questions. It's meant to start a dialogue. And I thought, that's awesome. But, as encyclicals used to mean this is here to stop a dialogue, right? This is here to give you an answer. This encyclical is the answer to the question. So if you don't believe in this, anathema. And here's the Pope using the very same means to write a letter and saying, this is just to start a dialogue. Maybe this was Laudato Si or something like that. So I think Pope Francis definitely doesn't want that reputation. He definitely wants people to believe that there's a certain amount of openness out there. And at the same time, I think he's not afraid to use his authority to end certain discussions as well.
You mentioned that the Holy Father has the ability to just go out there and pluck some random Jesuit and put them somewhere. Has he ever done that before? When has this happened?
Council of Trent all the way to 2000, and I guess one of my friends is working in Kazakhstan, and look, he's very happy to be in Kazakhstan. Yeah. He's a good Jesuit.
Was he plucked out by the church, by the Pope?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Absolutely. The Pope says, I need him in Kazakhstan. Wow. And so there he is. He's doing his thing.
So how does he even know about this random Jesuit there to go and say, I want you over here?
Well, because you have a bishop who sees the work that this man is doing and says, listen, this man is indispensable. And I'm sure his superiors think that he's indispensable somewhere in Texas or in Florida or whatever. So before you know it, the Pope knows that this has happened. And he says, I need you to work in Kazakhstan. And that Jesuit had a fourth vow of obedience and said, yes, I will do this.
So some Jesuits don't have that vow of obedience?
Yeah. So there are what are called grades in the Jesuits, right? So You have some Jesuits who are Jesuit brothers, right? And so they're kind of their own thing. The vows they take are poverty, chastity, and obedience. There's no doubt about that for a brother. But his vocation is to support the Society of Jesus' ministry, not as a priest. So he's a Jesuit brother. Then you have men in formation, scholastics we call them, right? So you have Jesuit scholastics who are on their way towards ordination. Then you have those Jesuits who are temporal coadjutors, meaning that they're here to help with the work that needs to get done. And these guys are great men. And then you have the fully professed, those who take these vows. I'm simplifying.
Sure,
if there's any Jesuit watching this right now and says, "Oh, you're an idiot," I am. I admit it. But I'm oversimplifying things by a lot. But essentially, they kind of get grouped up this way. And so, if you're professed of 4 vows, was what we usually refer to it as. That 4th vow is a vow of obedience to the Pope in regards to missions. So the Pope can mission us in a way that our local superior or our provincial or the Father General can't really stop him.
Scholastics. That's a cool title. I want to be a scholastic. Do you get to wear anything special?
You don't get paid much.
No.
Yeah. So you from the time you enter the Society of Jesus, you're allowed to wear a collar. So novices can wear the collar.
Okay.
Often scholastics are studying at universities where it could be a disadvantage to wear a collar in this way. And I'm a big fan of wearing the collar whenever you can, or whenever it's smart to, whenever you should. But sometimes it means people think you're a priest. And next thing you know, "Father, can you hear my confession?" And then you got to explain, well, although I'm dressed like a priest, I'm not a priest. And then you have all these things can get kind of confusing for people. So sometimes I understand why scholastics might not wear a collar as often or something like that.
But as a married man, I wouldn't be eligible for that, I would imagine.
Not with the Society of Jesus.
Yeah, no. Yeah. There was one other point that he said there that I want you to touch on.
Sure.
He said he'll make decisions in reference to the Pope. He'll make all the final decisions himself using his personal discernment rather than follow the teachings of the historical church. Now, that's an interesting evaluation. What's your impression here of Pope Francis? Is he just against the historical teachings of the church? What's going on there?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, the thing that I keep in mind is this: the Pope could be wreaking havoc on the church if he really wanted to, right? He could be going nuts right now and saying whatever he wanted and doing all kind of crazy things. And he doesn't seem interested in all those things. There are lots of things that he said that have bothered people that they've plucked out, sometimes out of context, sometimes not. Sometimes really, I think he's interested in shaking things up. He's interested in making a mess. There's no doubt that he's not for the faint of heart, right? He's not a pope for the faint of heart in a lot of ways. But according to the statement here, he'll make all the final decisions himself using his own personal discernment rather than follow the teachings of the historical church. Well, okay, just the first part. Make all the final decisions himself using his own personal discernment. Maybe, but he has the right to do that. He's the Pope. He has the right to be that way. He's also, I think, bound by the tradition of the church, and he appears to be somewhat reasonably bound to it in a real way. Like, again, he could be making a much bigger mess, and he's not. He's disappointed some people here and there. The way that he's not.
But didn't he say make a mess or something?
He
like
did.
That
Yeah, he did say. He's talking to young people, especially. He said, "Young people, go make a mess. Young people, go stir."
What was going on?
What was
do you remember the context behind that?
It was early on. He was talking to young people, and like our Holy Father often does, is that what he's saying is what lots of very reasonable people would say to this person in this instance right there. Like, in a lot of ways, I think he would be a fantastic parish priest. Like, he would just be a great parish priest. And he brings a lot of that charism to the papacy, which is less appreciated by theologians, right? Less appreciated by, or some theologians might love it, right? But less appreciated by at least some of these theologians. So I think his manner of carrying on as the Pope is a way that we're not all used to. I mean, this is me speaking personally. I grew up as a teenager with John Paul II as the Pope, and I adored John Paul II. I had no idea, because there was no internet at the time. I had no idea about a CC. I mean, as a teenager, no. I'm 47 years old. I know.
I barely remember those days.
Yeah. So I didn't know I didn't know anything about a CC. I didn't know anything about really any of that kind of stuff. I was ignorant of any kind of big controversy. All I know is I had gone to World Youth Day in Denver, Colorado in 1993, and it just blew my mind. All of these Catholics everywhere praying and being. I've never seen that many people together in one one place where nobody was drinking, nobody was fighting, nobody was doing any of those kind of things. And I thought, I've got to take myself and my faith seriously from now on, once I've seen this, once I've experienced this. And that was John Paul II's gift to me as a Catholic. He was just superb that way. Benedict XVI came along right when I was a scholastic studying philosophy. And it was like, that was such a gift to have a pope who was a real academic theologian who just loved to dive down deep into the problems and understood what the academic problem was, understood what the real questions were. He was just the perfect pope for the perfect at the perfect time for me. And he really did back me up on a lot of the things that I faced on a daily basis. Now, had I lived in Botswana, had I lived in, wherever else in the world besides where I was, maybe he would have seemed irrelevant. Maybe he would have seemed totally irrelevant. But where I was studying philosophy in the middle of some culture wars, in the middle of some liturgical wars, I felt like Benedict XVI was just backing me up on all those things. And it was a great feeling. Pope Francis talks about the kind of things that don't have the same effect on me that way, right? They don't feel like they are backing me up on the fights that I'm in on a daily basis until I start really listening to what he's saying. And I start saying, it feels like he's talking to my soul a lot. It feels like he's really calling me to conversion. It feels like he's calling me to a change in attitude more than a change in theology or more than a change in whatever else, And so in some ways he's a real challenge to me in a way that the previous popes hadn't been. And so I am very grateful for Pope Francis. I think, again, Benedict XVI was exactly the Pope I needed at exactly that time. But I don't have a lot of bad things to say about Pope Francis. I really don't.
Me, as far as a preference, I just wish, Benedict had stuck in there. I still I don't understand why he felt that it was time to abdicate.
I had a friend of mine who whenever he stepped down, a friend of mine said, look, he loved Benedict XVI. I love Benedict. He said, I absolutely loved him. And he said, I'm so mad right now. I know all he's going to go do is go home and pet his cat, so, like he felt like he was like, just when we needed this guy. Now, all right, if again, I don't know anything about what I'm about to talk about. What I'm about to say is completely, who knows if what I'm saying is right. But it seems to me like there were all kinds of financial scandals and all kind of things that were happening during the previous two popes that got kind of festered, because I think you had those popes weren't thinking about all of the mess that was going on behind. And it seems like Francis, whether he's fixing it or not is a question. Well, that remains to be seen. But it certainly seems like a thing. It's certainly all of a sudden you're finding out about these things that have been going on for decades that are all messed up and really messed up. And all of these problems are being brought to the surface under Francis. And I wonder if, it's just me thinking, I wonder if those cardinals, when they elected him, weren't thinking, this man has the intestinal fortitude to be able to attack those kinds of problems. And anything else that he does is his business. But what we really need him to do right now is fix these, banking scandals, whatever. And so I don't want to judge his pontificate based on whether he backs me up in my day-to-day activities. I guess his pontificate should be judged on other grounds.
There's a question here from Jeremiah that he has something that I think a lot of people are wondering right now. Have Jesuits generally gone more liberal and left these days?
I suppose it depends on how you define it. I think that we look just like the diocesan clergy in a lot of ways. So you will find Jesuits who celebrate the traditional Latin Mass in every single day and all that kind of stuff. And you've got other Jesuits who don't, and who are who would surprise you with the way that they acted or whatever. And I think we look a lot like the priesthood. We look a lot like the church, right? We look a lot like the church because we're so big. You can't, if you take a small order that has 25 members, you can sort of police a lot of things because they're going to be in one place and they're doing one thing. The bigger a group gets, the bigger the tent is going to have to be for that. And so I think when you look at the Jesuits in general, you're going to find that we look a lot like the church today. Your viewers that like you, I like you a lot. I think that you're doing some great things. I think you're pretty smart. I think your show is great. That's where I am. If that makes me a super conservative person, I don't know, but that's where I'm at least.
I saw
and the Jesuits I work with, I should say too. I just sorry to interrupt.
No.
But the Jesuits I work with are super guys. Like they are fantastic. So I'm with a group of 8 Jesuits who work in a high school, and these guys are just on fire for all the good things. And so I love the guys I'm with.
There was a question here from Timothy. Advice for overcoming scrupulosity. That's a big one. You care to tackle that one?
Yeah. Number one, be sure it's real scrupulosity. I know a lot of people who they come into confession, right? And they say, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." Before I get started, I should let you know that I suffer from scrupulosity, which is a way of saying, please don't be too hard on me. Because, please don't be too hard on me, yeah, so be sure it's real scrupulosity, right? St. Ignatius talks about this. He says scrupulosity is when you have a man in a barn surrounded by hay, and a lot of that hay crosses over itself and makes these little crosses all over the floor. And the man says, I can't leave the barn because if I step on any of these crosses, I will be committing sacrilege, right? That is scrupulosity. You're unable to carry out the mission that God has put you on. You're unable to really obey God for fear of messing up. That is real scrupulosity. There's other things that might be. There are people who just suffer from anxiety. There are other people who just want to be told it's all okay and patted on the head and said, "Go on, keep sinning. It's okay." That's not what we're talking about. I think real scrupulosity is when you cannot fulfill the mission God has placed in your lap because you are so afraid of messing up. You're so afraid of doing something wrong. And what is the advice? The advice is recognize the problem, right? Knowing is half the battle, like G.I. Joe used to say. Knowing is half the battle. As soon as you recognize that, hey, wait a second, God is calling me to do something, and I'm so afraid of walking on these crosses that I need to change the way that I'm acting to really obey God the way that I should. We ought to fear the Lord in some way. That's a real virtue, right? Fear of the Lord is a real virtue. So embrace that by being truly obedient to what God is really calling you to, rather than worrying about your own inability to carry out the small stuff.
One of the things that the Lord calls
helpful.
us, that is, and I have a follow-up, because one of the things that the Lord calls us to is to the sacrament and the Holy Eucharist. And I sometimes observe there are some who are scrupulous to the point that they could literally go to confession the day before receiving the Eucharist, and they feel like they can't present themselves to receive communion the very next day because maybe they're just struggling with some kind of sin that they've been dealing with for years or something like that. And so they end up finding themselves in this position that they really never go and receive the Eucharist because they constantly fear that they're in a state that's unworthy, even though they had just been to confession. Can you maybe touch on that? Is that scrupulous?
It could be. Depends on the sin, right? Depends on the sin. So rather than break it down systematically, though, one of the things so you remember teen life masses? I think they're still doing those in some places.
I've heard of them.
Teen life masses used to end. You know what I'm talking about?
Never experienced.
Yeah, I as a priest, I've walked into, hey, Father, can you come say mass here? And I walk in like, oh, by the way, it's a teen life mass. So like it can be kind of jarring if you're not used to it. But the way that they want you to end mass, and they told me they wanted me to end mass this way, is to say, go in peace, the mass never ends, or something along those lines. And I thought, that's not right. Like that's not really correct. Now, not to pick on teen life people, I'm sure there's lots of good being done, but that particular part was one that I kind of didn't like the way that sounded, because in the end, there is a time for liturgy. There is a time to go out and glorify God with your life that you've just received. Now go, you pick up your mat and walk.
Isn't
all
that
these
what
things.
mass means? It means go forth, right? Or send, right? Mass, missa, it's from the Latin word for where we get missiles. Like, so I mean, it would be to say there's never a time when we go out into the world and proclaim the gospel. If you say that we always have the mass. Yeah.
So okay, so you're hitting the nail on the head. And how this applies to the question is, I think that there are people who don't realize that the dangers of the world and all this kind of stuff that are out there, all those kinds of things, are part of what God understands. And he knows I'm sending you out like lambs among wolves, right? I'm sending you out, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard and you're going to mess up. But thank goodness that God is as merciful as he is and so graceful as he is. And in some ways, this is where it gets kind of weird. And I hope nobody misunderstands me. In some ways, if living a perfect life can be like the one who sweeps up their house and cleans it all out and it's all in perfect order, and then 7 demons move right back in, right? Because you've in fact, you can move from being a miserable sinner to being prideful. Look at me. I never sin. I've really got it down. I've just been to confession. My soul is clean. And now I'm walking around with just the full armor of God, and I can't go wrong. And then pride kind of can work its way in there, as if you don't need God to sustain you in grace. And once pride is there, pride is the chief of all the other vices. And so all these other vices just pile up right there. So what God might do is he might allow you, his permissive will, he might be allowing you to experience what it's like to feel how sinful you are.
Wow.
So that you are humble, so that you go back to God. I'll tell you, this is true for me. My most sincere prayers are when I'm on my knees asking God to forgive me. That's my most sincere prayer. So I pray to God to take away my sins. I pray to God to take away my vices. I pray to God to keep me holy and make me a perfect person. But I also know that for whatever reason, God isn't answering that prayer right now, and I'm assuming it's for my own good. I'm assuming that God would rather me on my knees praying fervently than walking around saying, I've got it. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm perfect. So hope that answers the question.
It does. No, Father, you knew this one was coming.
What you got?
Anytime the word Jesuit is mentioned, this one comes up. This is from Nick. I know a lot of Father James Martin's words have come with controversy. Come with controversy in the Catholic Church. Excuse my ignorance, but does that controversy extend to the Jesuits as well? Do many support him as Jesuits?
Father Martin is a very popular author. There are lots of people, Jesuit and otherwise, who like him. Bishops like him. The Pope admires at least aspects of his work, it seems like, and I will say this, to be perfectly clear, I've never read a single James Martin book. I've never read a full article that he's written. I am woefully ignorant of Father James Martin's work. People have sent me some things he's tweeted. I've read Bishop Chaput's sort of critique of him, and I watched Trent Horn's video of him, and I assume that those were accurate in terms of accurate portrayals of what he does and all that kind of stuff. And if so, I'm a fan of Trent Horn. I'm a fan of Chaput. I think that they're very clear thinkers, and I would assume that that critique had some merit to it. But I don't personally know that much about James Martin's work personally. I've just been sent some things out of context and whatnot, and it's led me to not think, man, the next book I'm going to read has got to be a James Martin book. I'm just not all that aware of it. But I will tell you, a lot of people like him, and I'll tell you, there's this other piece too, and I think this is part of why maybe bishops give him so much leeway to say the things that he says, and why so many people support him. There are a lot of people who don't take that part of Christ that appears in the Gospels to be perfectly at home with marginalized, sinful people, right? Jesus seems to be very much okay, even when it scandalizes other people, even when other people get angry about this, even when other people, how can you do this? Jesus seems very at home eating with sinners. And if our real gripe is with the Pharisees, if our real gripe is being on the side of the Pharisees, we don't like what we're seeing, then I'm all for James Martin. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's really the problem, but I can tell you, if that's the problem, then I would stand right next to James Martin and defend him. I don't know if that's the problem. I mentioned I read a couple of excerpts of his book. I picked up a book and just opened it up and read a page. And he, I think if I remember right, it was a paragraph about Zacchaeus. And James Martin saying, look, the first thing we got to do is tell people, hey, I see you and I'm coming to your house and I'm going to eat with you tonight, and maybe that's what he's trying to do. In doing that, he seems to be holding back on saying a lot of things about the moral aspects of what's going on. And that's an important part. That's a very, very important part, that we have to say that living a life of sin will corrupt you. It will make you bad. And it's good for you to avoid those kinds of sins. I don't know if that's part of his message or not. People say that it's not. I don't know. There you have it. I'm ignorant. I don't know anything.
This is a really good one from Hallelujah.
She's great, by the way.
Yeah,
she's all over the
is,
place. She's
right?
awesome. Yeah.
She's known in all of the Catholic channels. Very helpful in weeding out the trolls. She has a really good question here. What is Father's opinion of lay spiritual directors? Are they a good idea or glorified life coaches?
I could say the very same thing about some that are not lay, right? Some spiritual directors can love being a life coach as well. So yeah, spiritual direction and life coaching is not the same thing. It's really not the same thing. It's also not therapy. A lot of people think spiritual direction is a form of therapy. They'll come in and say, I need a spiritual director. And what I really need is to work through this problem that's going to take we're going to have to go over this problem again and again and again and again to finally make the kinds of progress in this one particular aspect of my life that I really need. It's not quite what spiritual direction is. What spiritual direction is, in some ways, is to reflect to the person who's speaking to you what they're saying in some ways, because it helps for you to reframe some things people say. So when people are going through a moment of confusion or whatever, sometimes they just need to be told what they sound like when they say those things, and that's can be helpful. But St. Ignatius talks a lot about spiritual direction, especially retreat direction, ought to be a spiritual director trying to get out of the way so that God can do his work in the directee. And the best spiritual directors take themselves out of it altogether. They really remove themselves from the worst thing in the world is if you go in there and say, I got all these problems and I'm going to put it on my directee. I'm a spiritual director. I'm going to put all of my problems on my spiritual directee. I'm going to imagine all of my hangups are this person's hangups. And those that can really, really go wrong, whether they're late or not. There's no special charism that lay people don't have access to when it comes to, at least to the Ignatian version of spiritual direction. So if this is something that greatly interests you and you feel like God has put it on your heart to do spiritual direction, to be a spiritual director, and you've been confirmed in that by people telling you that you're doing a good job, you have maybe a good mentor in all of this, I think a lay person can do a fantastic job.
Robert asks a question here. Where do you work at and where are you from?
I work at Jesuit High School in New Orleans, Louisiana. I am the president of the school. So most people know that schools have principals, right? So the president would be the one who directs, hires, and fires the principal, and the CFO, and the director of advancement, the IT director, the head of maintenance, that sort of stuff. So I'm the president of Jesuit High School. I work there. I also help out at parishes around New Orleans. I help out at the Sister Servants of Mary Convent. I often say Mass early in the morning over there. So that's what I do. And I'm originally from Eunice, Louisiana, which is just outside of, I say just outside, 45 minutes away from Lafayette, Louisiana. That's a little bit bigger town nearby. And I'm from Patassa, which is this area outside of Eunice, really. So really, I'm from the country. I grew up on a rice and crawfish farm in the middle of nowhere, Louisiana. Not nowhere, great place, but not a lot of people know about it.
Jeremiah says other orders don't seem to have gone left, not as left as the Jesuits. Any comments on that one?
Some of them certainly have. Some orders most certainly have. Some orders have, have founders that have been, has been found out that their founders were not really good people. There's all kinds of things going on, and I think that I trust people's discernment whenever they discern into whatever order, whatever charism is calling them to be the best that they can be, the person that God has made them to be. I think that the Society of Jesus is 500 years old and was founded on some really, really good stuff that St. Ignatius Loyola gave us, and those early first Jesuits found a way to grab on to how the Society of Jesus should be. And I every day pray to those Jesuit saints who have done such a great job living out the charism. And I know there are other orders that also do well. I just know that they wouldn't be for me. I mean, I know, I never thought for a minute God was calling me to be a Franciscan. I never thought for a minute God was calling whatever kind of Franciscan, out there,
And y'all go ahead, put some more chat questions in the live chat. Again, send it to @ReasonandTheology. We'll take just a few more. Here's an interesting one. Mental Prayers a Key asks, can you describe the Jesuit view of predestination and why you find it compelling in comparison to Thomists' views? That's a tough one.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's tough and it's easy at the same time. The easy answer is there is no Jesuit view of predestination that is truly Jesuit. The church's doctrine is the doctrine of the Jesuits. We have no doctrine apart from the church's doctrine. Now, there may be individual Jesuits where you say, whatever this Jesuit said is what I like or don't like, or Bernard Lonergan, or, whoever it is, Henri de Lubac, Pope Francis, whatever, there are different Jesuits that might have a take on it, but the Jesuit order itself just does not have a doctrine. We do know that at the time of St. Ignatius, it was the burning question of the day, whether we were predestined or not, or whether it was faith and works, all this kind of stuff, all those kind of classical Protestant versus Catholic fights that they had were absolutely raging and brand new. Not brand new exactly, but they felt brand new, because Martin Luther is older than St. Ignatius by less than a decade, I think, if I get my numbers right. So that was his time. And so Ignatius counseled people to say, if people tell you that we are predestined, try to help them understand free will. If people go all out on free will and deny that God predestines us, try to tell them about God and how God's foreknowledge of things and his plan. All that. So Ignatius was almost always like, whatever way the boat is leaning, run to the other side of the boat so that the boat tilts back in the right direction. Find that way in between. Now that's Saint Ignatius, I suppose, trying to engage a theological question, but I think it's also a sort of a spiritual discipline as well, a good spiritual discipline to say that, like, there are complex questions. And sometimes if you come in with the one answer that just trumps all other answers, you might be missing something that Christ might be trying to reveal to us regarding these very controversial issues that are controversies within the Catholic Church. I don't mean like the doctrines that are so solid.
Yeah. Father Brown, do you have a habit on you? Do Jesuits have habits?
Technically, no. So in the constitutions of the Society of Jesus, it's our habit is whatever reputable priests in the area wear, we should wear. So for example, in the United States, most reputable priests would wear a regular clerical shirt and black pants and maybe a suit jacket, or in my case, because I was coming from a football game, I think so Jesuits are supposed to really kind of blend in. Now, as it turns out, Jesuits tend to go a tiny bit or a step more simple than whatever the diocesan clergy do. So a Jesuit, what people call a Jesuit cassock, is just like a diocesan cassock, except minus the buttons and minus kind of the big cuffs and the pleated back. It's just a little bit more simple. The Jesuits we tie our cincture knot on the right-hand side if we're wearing a cassock instead of on the left, like the diocesan guys. I don't know if the camera is doing the right or left thing the right way, but so the Jesuit order, we do not have a prescribed habit that we have to wear, but we should be wearing whatever diocesan priests wear in the area. And if I were to go to a place where no one ever wore a habit, I would try to blend in that way. I would say, okay, this is what we do. So I probably wouldn't even wear clerics if I were in a place where the priests didn't wear clerics as a habit. Maybe the bishop said, don't wear clerics. Who knows?
Wow. There's interesting one here. Should we not respect Father James Martin for his commitment to vocation, or should we?
Is that Should we not respect Father James Martin for his commitment to vocation? Mm-hmm. I mean, here's another kind of like interpretive principle for everything you're going to ever see about James Martin or anybody else. Please don't judge an entire order based on one member who grabs headlines, and then also don't judge that person for the headline that he grabbed. Mm-hmm. Father James Martin is a three-dimensional human being. Mm-hmm. He's a priest of God. I'm assuming, I don't know him. I've never met him. I've never spoken with him. I don't know him. But I'm assuming he says Mass every single day and offers the Eucharist every single day with consecrated hands. There's something going on there that most of us just tend to completely forget because they read a tweet that he wrote or something like that. I don't like the tweet either, maybe. I don't know. But please don't. I think we should never judge a person by the one headline that they grabbed. It's just that headline. Please don't. Yeah. Just don't.
And respecting somebody for their vocation is a little different than maybe saying that everything that they say is necessarily a respected opinion, mm-hmm. right? I mean, there's a distinction between the person, their vocation, and things that they say. Mm-hmm. Here's a super chat. What made you choose to be a Jesuit, and how do you feel about the criticisms about Jesuits?
Yeah. Okay. So what made me choose the Jesuits? The charism of the order, as it was laid out by St. Ignatius Loyola and all those Jesuit saints who lived it so incredibly. When I see that, I wonder how anybody would choose anything but the Jesuits, right? It's like so convincing to me. It's so convincing to me. I'm like, this is it. Look, here it is. It's right here. Everything is here and in its place. This is just perfect. And St. Ignatius did, in fact, sum up all of Christian spirituality, including some pre-Christian spirituality, summed it all up into what we would call, truly authentic Ignatian spirituality. He just sums all of it up and puts it in its right place. And it's so good. I don't know I feel like I'm, falling to pieces even describing it. It's so good. And I I took that early on as a sign that, like, okay, this must be it. Because I'd look at the Dominicans, ton of respect for them. Great. Looked at the Benedictines, ton of respect for them. I love what they're doing. I looked at St. Ignatius and said, this is it. I also saw that St. Ignatius took a lot of he himself, sinful man, and something about the way that he understood all this stuff turned him into a saint, and did the same thing with Francis Xavier, and did the same thing with so many other people who became Jesuit saints. And I thought to myself, I knew myself to be pretty sinful. I knew myself to be pretty worldly. I knew myself to be in need of something that was going to form me. And I just knew that the Jesuits had done that so many times and done such a good job. Now, again, the internet wasn't around hardly at the time. It'd been around for a few years, I guess, but the things that you can now, if you search the word Jesuit, you can find conspiracies about how we assassinated Lincoln. You can find these things of what happened to the Jesuits. They used to be so great, now they're this crazy liberal order or whatever. You find all these things that are out there, and I've just seen enough to contradict those things that make me think I'm so glad that I became a Jesuit. I really feel this is what God called me to do. And another question would be, for anybody who questioned that, I've had people tell me online things. They'd say, if you had any self-respect, if you love the church, you'd leave the order right now. I'm like, hey, I got down on my knees in front of the Eucharist, in front of the Blessed Sacrament. I got down on my knees and promised perpetual poverty, chastity, and obedience in the Society of Jesus. No, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. They're going to have to make me leave. They're going to have to kick me out. I would never just say, oh, because of some other Jesuits over there, my vocation must be kaput. No way. No way. Not at all. Not even a little bit. Now, they may kick me out. Maybe I'll do something so stupid that they kick me out. But so far they haven't. And,
It's kind of like saying, well, you should leave the priesthood because there's some bad priests out there.
I can't see the logic in that.
Yeah, no, that doesn't make sense. Here's a good super chat. Ignatius gives a lot of prayer methods, reading of scripture that involve imagining yourself within a scene.
Mm-hmm.
Many, not all, Orthodox Christians say we shouldn't use our imagination. Thoughts?
This is the greatest question. I've been just completely diving into this because I've had some conversations with some Orthodox Christians about this, and it's a fantastic question, and maybe someday a book needs to be written about this. But by and large, the criticisms I've seen of imaginative prayer have been a very different criticism than what's really happening in Ignatian prayer. Ignatian imaginative prayer starts off. I'm about to go nuts on this. You got time?
Yeah, we got time. Yeah, let's do it.
So there's this whole anthropology that Ignatius buys into. That that mankind, right, is a free being made by God to be free. To be free, our liberty, right? You sum that up by saying our freedom, our liberty, that's made up of our memory, our intellect, and our will. Okay, this goes back to Aristotle, and lots of people between Aristotle and St. Ignatius talk about this. But our liberty is made up of our memory, our intellect, and our will. Our memory is just the sum of all of the experiences that we've had. It's the moments in our life that make us who we are in some kind of sense. That's our memory, the things we've held on to, the experiences we've held on to. Our intellect then processes all of those memories, right? Our intellect has to work on those memories, and that's why a parent who spanks his kid, and that some kids grow up to say, I hate my parents, they spanked me. And others grow up to say, I love my parents, thank God they spanked me. So like you can with your intellect, you can understand your memories in a way, in such a way that makes you more or less free to do what God wants you to do. Then you have your will. Is your will strong enough to carry out the things that you know are right and good? Or are you just weak-willed? Okay, so your freedom, your liberty comes from your memory, your intellect, and your will. All St. Ignatius wants you to do is take lots of scripture and lots of good, sound theology and contemplate those things in such a way that fills your memory so that it becomes like a real experience, right? Like a real memory that you've had. So they've done tests on this, right? They've asked guys to just close their eyes and imagine that they were shooting free throws, and they saw that guys who just using their imagination shot free throws in basketball from the free throw line in their mind, actually got better at shooting free throws in real life. Just imagining it made them better at it, right? Yeah. So if we imagine walking with Christ, if we imagine hearing his words, if we imagine being told by Jesus, blessed are you when you are poor, whatever. How can that not have a bigger impact on us than if we just open up the Bible and say, look, Jesus said these words? Instead, I'm saying I've sensed it. I've heard that authentic voice of Christ in Scripture or in some sound piece of doctrine, some kind of way. So then now that my memory is full of all those things, in prayer, I'm going to think about those memories and I'm going to say, how does this apply to me? How does it, how has God been good to me? How is it that I need to change a little bit, whatever? And then I ask God for the grace to have the kind of will that it would take to go out and do those things. I even pray for it. That's all we're doing with our imagination. We're not walking around with what is, there are people that really worry that somehow if you, in your imagination, hear Jesus talk to you, that you're going to walk around saying, oh, look at me, Jesus talked to me. I'm walking around, what is this, prelest or whatever? I'm walking around. I'm such a big deal because I use my imagination and I imagined God before me, giving me more attention than I'm actually due or something like that. Okay, maybe there's all kind of problems with praying like that, but that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is trying to have a real experience, a real memory of the kinds of things that Christ wanted us to have, I believe. So yeah, okay, that was like a super condensed version, but I'm very big into the right kind of imaginative prayer. I got super excited just now. Sorry,
no,
that was too much.
That's a helpful one because it comes up constantly.
I just had some pretty strong coffee, so I'm switching to water.
We got a couple more here. Has Father read the Malachi Martin book on the Jesuits? If so, any comments on it?
So true story. When I was a little bitty novice, when I was just a little novice, I found that book on the shelf and I read it. And a Jesuit walking by saw it and just excoriated me for reading it.
Wow.
He's like, that book is full of lies and complete fabrications and blah, blah, blah. So like, I had no idea. So
scolded.
Yeah. So it did leave me with the impression that Malachi Martin is full of malarkey, right? So he's he's good at telling a story. He's good at weaving, at painting a picture for you, and he's really interesting to read. And he's also not afraid to stretch the truth or even make up a couple things to back up whatever he's saying, And I think also he felt, when he was writing those books, all those books that he wrote, he felt, what was it, Windswept Church?
Yeah,
that he wrote.
House.
Yeah, Windswept House. He felt a thing that a lot of people were feeling, and told a story that kind of made this all make sense for people in a time when they felt like there wasn't a lot making sense. And so it made him very popular. It got a lot of people to like him. And I don't have a lot against him. I'm kind of dismissive of him in a sense, right? I kind of like, well, I never took him all that seriously to begin with. And I know there are a lot of Jesuits who fervently dispute the facts that he lays out. And so it makes me think it's probably not a good source for history. Might be an okay source for entertainment if you can do it in such a way that doesn't lead your heart to hate people that you shouldn't hate, So
last one. This is from Joachim. Just got here, and I got to say that CGI is perfect. It looks like he's sitting right next to you. And so, Father, are you made of cardboard? I'm curious. Can you confirm that one? Are you made of cardboard?
I am not made of cardboard. I am not. This is real life. This is all real life, and this is great. In fact, it's great to be here in the Reason and Theology studios. It was great to pray with you earlier. To pray with you and your family,
awesome.
that was really, really nice. Today's the feast of Saint Josaphat, which is an excellent. I don't know if you want to talk about Saint Josaphat
absolutely.
a little bit, but
yeah, let's do it. I was surprised to find out that he's also on the Roman Rite calendar.
Sure.
I've never noticed that.
We got some Josaphat. Yeah,
and we share the same day of celebration, or same feast day for Saint Josaphat. And by the way, we did I did a video with Father Deacon Dragani just a few days ago where he put to death that whole myth that that Saint Josaphat is a murderer, because there's a lot of rumors going around online. Have you heard of this before?
Yeah, who would start a rumor? I didn't hear about it until Father Deacon said it. But who would start that to begin with, unless you have so much hate in your heart that you're willing to break a commandment, right? You tell a lie so that people would believe your side of whatever argument you're having, that you would lie about a saint and say that he was a murderer. That's just heartbreaking. Anybody would ever do that. But apparently it's a lie that people wanted to believe.
It's pretty common right
It's
now.
a lie that people wanted to believe, and it's unfortunate.
I think it's by the same group that would say Saint Francis of Assisi was demonically possessed.
I don't get it.
Same group.
Yeah, I don't get
it's
it.
usually a very anti-Catholic, anti-Western group. And so
Yeah, I don't get it.
it's very odd.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was awesome having you here earlier in the chapel, Father. That was truly an honor.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And so everybody, thank y'all so much for participating and watching. We're right here at an hour, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Father, did you have any concluding comments, anything you wanted to sneak in there, or any plugs you wanted to put in?
Can I say one thing real
Yeah.
quick about Catholic YouTube?
Yeah.
I had lost all faith in Catholic YouTube when I stumbled upon this guy's channel. And this guy, you got these people who say, I was going to leave the Catholic Church and Reason and Theology saved me. And also like, I'm so glad. Those are awesome stories. I love them. Those are great. For me, I wasn't going to leave the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
I was Catholic. I wasn't going anywhere, but I definitely was leaving Catholic YouTube. I was definitely ready to give it all up. And you might, if you look back through your comments, I don't know, it's probably about over a year ago now.
Mhm.
I was leaving these like super enthusiastic comments like, thank God there's somebody like you on the internet. Thank God there's somebody who's willing to like drill down a little bit deeper and say what's true. And, you know, my mode of doing theology, if you want to call it that, or my charisma and all that kind of stuff is not to do what you do, right? Where you're getting down into the weeds and you're going back to councils and you're quoting what this Pope said and that Pope said, and you're breaking down with all the nuance in the world, you know. That's not me. I'm not going to do all that, but I'm glad you're doing it. You know,
I feel like when you use
really
the word
doing it.
nuance, I feel like we have to have like some kind of explosion or fireworks that happens anytime somebody here at RNT uses the word nuance. Some kind of buzzer or something goes off.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, so your channel, if I'm plugging anything, I just want to plug your channel because your channel really did save my understanding of Catholic YouTube. It's made me much more a believer of the good people out there can, in fact, make some noise and do good things. And you I think do a lot to bring people back to some sanity. And I appreciate you having me on.
Well, let me put you on the spot. Are you going to be doing any YouTube?
Bienvenidos a todos. Bienvenidos a show. John Brown. Am I going to do any YouTube? So maybe, I don't know. I'm thinking about it. People have asked me to do a couple things, and I'm really flattered that y'all would want me to do anything like that. I don't think it's my place to get into something that's outside of like my real primary ministry for too much, because I'm assigned to that, right? So out of obedience, I have this job at the place where I'm at, and I'm working really hard to do that. I also know that while I was at Jesuit High School, I taught theology for many years, and I have a bunch of like really, I think, good stuff that people could benefit from hearing. So maybe I'll do something. Maybe I'll put some things out there. Maybe if people have some good ideas for me to do, some people helped me out in a kind of a live chat the other night on how to get my microphone set up and all that stuff. And I enjoyed doing it. I don't know how much time I have to do a lot of it, but if I do it, my goal will not to be to support myself doing that at all, or to have this be my ministry. My ministry is to work at Jesuit High School until I'm given another assignment, and I follow that religiously. No pun intended. I'm religious about that focus of my work, but YouTube's awesome. Fun.
Yeah, it's something.
Yeah, it's something. Right. It's something.
Sometimes it's fun.
Right.
At other times it's interesting. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, and shout out to guys like Eric Ibarra and William Albrecht. Those guys are also the Reason and Theology circles of people are also very fantastic.
Father Brown, you got the book right over there. Can you hold that up? Eric's book is up. Yeah, it is out. He just sent the copy. The Papacy. In fact, you can go to Amazon.com. Just type in Eric Ibarra, The Papacy. It is out. So all of you who are interested in the whole East-West debate on the Papacy, check it out. And I'll have Eric on pretty soon to discuss it. So y'all look forward to that. But it looks like everybody enjoyed you being here. They're saying Father Brown is a regular. Have him back on again. Yeah, we'll certainly.
We got to get you to New Orleans. You got to come and see us in New Orleans.
To.
There's so many good things going on over there. Bring your family. It'd be a good time for everybody.
It's been a while since I've been in New Orleans, so I'll certainly swing by. But once again, thank you so much, Father Brown, for coming on. This was truly an honor.
Thank you very much.
And everybody, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and lastly, check me out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology if you want to support me. See you later. God bless. Oh, wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video.
If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/reason and theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.
Hey RNT fans, just a quick word about one of our sponsors, Verbum, an excellent Bible and theological software. Go to verbum.com/reason. You'll support what we're doing here at Reason and Theology. You'll also get 10% off any of the packages that you choose, along with 5 free extra books. Again, verbum.com/reason.
If you're looking to buy or sell a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, you're going to want to call Real Estate for Life, and they're going to connect you with a Catholic agent. Now, that agent will donate a portion of their commission upon sale, and Real Estate for Life will donate 75% of that gift to a pro-life organization at no cost to you. Call Real Estate for Life at 1-877-LIFE-US1 or text them 248-431-1440. If you care about the pro-life cause, call them now.